Welcome back to the Exchange Podcast, and this is Thanksgiving weekend. This is on a Monday, and everyone is going to be celebrating Thanksgiving, and I am just thankful that we are back here for the 63rd episode. Is this 63?
A lot. Yeah, I got
63, 64. We were talking about this the other night. We're into our second year doing this. A lot of podcasts are done by the 10th episode. We're still going, and our subscriptions and likes are still going. And if you haven't, please go tell your friends about us. Like, subscribe, and share on all your social media platforms. If you have questions, go right down there into the little scroll bar, type them in, ask them. We don't care what they are. We're not going to shame you. We will answer them to the best of our ability. But there are a little bit of changes coming up in the upcoming weeks, and I won't speak for JaVaughn. I'll let him discuss that with you. As many of you know, he and Sarah are expecting a little boy, and 2 weeks.
A week from this Saturday.
A week from this Saturday. So I'm going to let him go ahead and just kind of share that news with you, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, for sure. So me and my wife, we agreed to enjoy marriage for another year, but as you guys can tell, that didn't work out. So we don't enjoy each other, and we're having a child. No, I'm joking.
Enjoyed each other a little too much.
Yeah, well, hey, family-friendly Christian show here. No, I'm kidding. My wife and I have been blessed by the Lord with so far a healthy baby boy that's going to be on the way. He's due December 2nd. But
congratulations.
Anything could happen. He could come a little earlier, could come a little bit later. And so we're just praying that everything goes well. Sarah's been healthy besides, the typical, she's tired, she can't sleep right because, he's kicking at like 2 in the morning. And we also got a puppy. So I don't know why we keep adding the stress to ourselves. But but I will be taking a little bit of a step back. I will still be part of the podcast. In terms of I'll be taking a producer role, so to speak. I'll still speak when I can, but I plan on just stepping back and letting Thomas and Michael take the helm. And while I'm gone, I still expect us to get comments and discussions and just really reach out to everybody. And, we changed it. We went from 100 and we want to go to 1,000. So we're still going to be going through that, but if you can keep my wife and my son in your prayers, we appreciate it. And we look forward to Luke being in our lives just as much as I look forward to this episode.
Absolutely. And as he said, he's not going anywhere. So if you don't hear him on here, nobody said, "Oh, what happened to JaVaughn? He's gone." No, he's still here. And from time to time, we'll be back on it, and probably a little ways down the road, we'll be back on it more often than he's not. But, look, those of you who have had kids, I have not, but those of you who have had kids know you want to spend time with them. And we at the Exchange Podcast never wants this to come before family. Anyway, Michael, how's your week been going?
Well, so far so good. Can't complain. Even if I did, it wouldn't change anything, right?
It never does.
Yeah.
It never does. And so anything... So just normal week, huh?
Except for the trip to San Antonio see if I can be part of a clinical trial.
How'd that turn out?
So based on the assessments that they did in the office, they said I'm a perfect candidate. However, they're waiting on the results of my kidney function and liver function test. As long as those are within the acceptable parameters, then I'm in. That's the only thing we're waiting on now. They said that I could hear as early as today, which I didn't. Yeah. So they said at the latest it should be Wednesday. I'll know for sure. And if that's the case, then I'll go back in December to start.
Either way, God's got it in His hands. And those of you who believe, keep Him in your prayers and keep the family in prayer, and we do, and we're believing God. We believe God on this podcast for miracles. I've had my dad on here who shared miracles, and my cousin who he was also a recipient of a miracle. We believe in those, so keep praying, because God still does that. But
100%.
To kind of get into the order of the day, last week we kind of talked about the kingdom of heaven, and there's always, what was it Lord Helmet said on Spaceballs? There's always not the dark side and the light side. I don't remember what theirs were.
The Schwartz?
The Schwartz, yeah. There was always the other. And I by no means
Your Schwartz is as big as mine.
I by no means am trying to demean the Bible. But just as there are forces out there for good, one of the things I think that a lot of people within the church and the church in general, and a lot of ministers, I was talking to someone who they listened to this podcast, and we were talking, and they made mention, they said that a lot of ministers that they listen to never mention the devil, and they never mention hell.
Interesting.
It is interesting because it's kind of like, how do you exactly believe in God, or let's say you don't believe in God, exactly what is the measuring stick that you use to know that you've got a straight line? I mean, how do you know that something's wrong if you don't have some sort of truth? And in that, how do you know? I mean, how can you deny that the stuff that's going on, God permits it, obviously, but He's not, because the Bible says that all good and perfect gifts come from the Father of lights.
Right.
And I think that's what a lot of ministers and a lot of people in the church want to. They want to just focus on. They want to focus on, that everything's good, everything's rosy, and Michael, within your situation, just looking at this from the natural, God's not behind that, right? I mean, there is the fallen nature of man. There is the fallen world. So there are things that happen to us simply because we live in a fallen world. We live in a world that is not the way God created it. But we do have to take a step back and go, how did the world get there? And how did we get to this point that we are? And I look at certain things, such as, we were talking before coming on the podcast, and we looked it up, and CBN News is one of them that's reporting it. And I don't know what most people's thoughts are on CBN News, but I don't think they would report this if there wasn't some validity to it. That there were 100 or 200 Islamic men in the Gaza Strip that have come to Christ because of a dream that they had of Christ. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's possible that we could have Apostle Paul situation right there right there in that situation. Pray to God we do. But one of the things that came to my mind was in Mark chapter 3 and 24, backing up to 22, it says, and the scribes who came down from Jerusalem were saying he is possessed by Beelzebub. Now, who they're talking about here is Jesus. They're saying that Jesus was possessed. And it says, and by the prince of demons, he casts out the demons. And he called them to him and said to them in parables, how can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom can, I think it went one page. That kingdom cannot stand. And during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln kind of quoted that. He said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. And we look at, we kind of talked about how that you look at things like Antifa, BLM, LGBT, and they're all out here doing all these parades for Hamas. And Hamas hates those three organizations. The reason is because, number one, the things that Antifa stand for and the things that BLM stand for are counterintuitive to the things that extreme Islam would be for. They're against it. And then LGBT, I mean, these are the guys that are throwing gays off of buildings. But there's one thing that brings them all together, and that is, it is the Christian principles that this country was founded on.
Yeah, and you go against that, and you fight it, and you destroy it, and you tear it down.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right. And I think, and I sent you this quote, but, I think it really holds true here. To be united by hatred is a fragile alliance at best.
Yeah.
And when people are just hating on the foundation,
right?
You're going to break it down, and then what happens after that?
Mm-hmm.
What happens? What happens in I can't believe I'm bringing it up first. What happens in World War II when Germany does take over most of Europe? Are they really going to just let Italy be Italy? No. They'll go after them.
Right.
When you create something where you all say, hey, we all hate the same thing over there,
yeah,
that's a problem. And to go back to your previous statement about churches not talking about Satan or the enemy,
right,
just in general, and I think a lot of times churches will say, well, this person, that person, this person. I think the enemy, meaning Satan and his followers, have done a really good job of making us Christians not like other humans, which we were called to love humans.
Right. That's why Apostle Paul says we wrestle not against flesh and blood,
right,
but against every principality.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Paul also said in Romans 16:17, I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you have been taught. Avoid them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem. You cannot let people get in and start causing divisions. We have far more in common than we have
100%.
differences.
Yeah.
And I think as far as take Christianity, for example, when you'll hear, well, the Baptists this or the Lutherans that or the Pentecostals this or that, fundamentally we have more in common than we don't. And we focus on these little things, nitpicking little things that aren't necessarily relevant.
You're right.
To your salvation.
Yeah.
But going back to the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that those are extremely fragile, because once that enemy has capitulated or has been conquered, then they turn on each other. And so all these groups in the United States that are pro-Hamas don't realize that the instant that they're no longer useful, they would turn on them in a heartbeat.
Well, Bibi Netanyahu said, I think it was last week, he said that they look at Israel as the little Satan, but they look at America as the big Satan. And so therefore they want to destroy, right now they're wanting to destroy Israel, but eventually they want to destroy America. And you mentioning that scripture out of Romans and 1 Thessalonians 5 and 12, he says, we ask you, brothers, to respect those, some versions would say, know those who labor among you and are over you in the Lord and admonish you, and to esteem you very highly in love because of their work, but be at peace among yourselves. See, when I say that side, I'm not trying to just deliberately create this division. But at the end of the day, there are sides. And that side is very, that's why Jesus said that Satan knows. I mean, when they came to him, they said he's casting out demons by the prince of demons. Jesus says Satan knows that his house can't be divided. His kingdom can't be divided. If it's divided, it won't stand. And so Satan knows this. So what he does is these guys are activists. And I mentioned last week about these kids that I was dealing with. And one of them said, what is the point of life if all we do is live and die? And that's a very fatalistic point of view. It's very nihilistic because that all comes back from, really, we can extend that back to the French Revolution. When the French Revolution broke out, Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine did go over there, almost got killed. And they wanted to go fight, and George Washington said, this is not our revolution. And what he meant by that was, he wasn't saying we shouldn't help them because this isn't our revolution, because they helped us. He was saying, his meaning was, this is not our revolution because in our revolution, we fought for one thing, and that was that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that every man is created equal with certain unalienable rights by their creator. The French Revolution was very humanistic at nature. And Thomas Paine almost lost his life. And not because he was fighting valiantly, but because once he got over there, he realized that what Jefferson said was true, or what Washington said was true. So I mean, the point being is that if we take that nihilistic point of view, that what do we do if all we do is live and die, then we have to go back and we have to ask ourselves the question, going back to that quote that Abraham Lincoln, he makes that at the Gettysburg Address. And if all we do is live and die and nothing that we do matters, then the Civil War didn't matter.
Well, there's no consequence for any of your actions.
That's right.
Ultimately, it doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah.
And we know that an overwhelming majority of the world holds certain truths to be the same regardless of where they are or what kind of culture. The murder is regarded as wrong.
Depending on who you are.
Pretty well, yes. But as a general rule amongst humanity.
Right. No,
that is accepted.
Yeah.
You know, and there are certain things that are fundamentally the same amongst all humans, regardless of their geographic location or their ethnicity or whatever. But if you take that view then none of it really matters. Nothing you do matters. You might as well just, and that's the bait of Satan. You know,
right.
It's like you just go out and live for yourself, do whatever you want to do, and don't worry about the consequences.
That's right.
You have the concept of all that. When I said, unless depending on who you are, I am agreeing with you that we all agree that you really shouldn't harm children in a certain way that I won't speak of because we go to YouTube. But it depends on who you are. And no, I'm not talking conspiracy theory or anything. I'm saying people just go out of their way and do it, and then they get away with it. And you want to talk about crazy stuff. I mean, you've got kids who go through that, and a good number of them, just on accounts that you'll see, they don't give up hope. Most of the time, it's because you ask them, why didn't you give up hope? Somebody told me about this Jesus guy. So I'm holding out for that. You have people who are on drugs. My father was on the podcast earlier this year, and he never gave up his hope because somebody was telling him about Jesus. You have all these people. Thomas's dad was shot, blown up, everything that could happen to a human being, and he never gave up. Not, I'm being hyperbolic.
Right.
He was injured severely to where his innards were outside when they should have been inside. But still, you have these moments where Thomas was talking about it, miracles happen. And if there really was no hope in Jesus, then yes, the nihilism makes more sense.
Well, to Michael's point, in Romans 2, and beginning with verse 13, Paul writes again, and he says, "For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. For when the Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law." He says in verse 15, "They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them." And going back to because my dad knew this guy years ago. He was a minister, and he had been a headhunter in like this, some like dark, it wasn't dark Africa, but it's like in deep jungles, right? Rainforest kind of jungles. And so he talked about, he became a Christian. I don't know how he got here to the States, but he got here, he became a Christian, and he would often say that even in their culture that had never had anyone preach to them, they had never heard the Bible, they knew certain things were wrong. Men with men, women with women, child abuse, rape, incest, murder. Those things were all penalties of death. Now, am I saying we should put gay people to death? No, I'm not. What I'm saying is there is something within human nature that automatically, you don't have to hear about Christ to know those things are wrong. And like you said, if we take that view of nihilism, then ultimately our actions have no consequences. But the flip side of that is, and this is where some people would say that I'm stepping on the side of conspiracy theory. To me, and I mean, if you guys disagree, but to me, it really does come across like this is a deliberate attempt, because if you can get these kids to believe, and these are like young kids, if you can get them to believe that nothing they do matters, I mean, what was the point in, most of the people that were major influencers and leaders during the civil rights movement, if they would have taken that stance that nothing I do matters, then Jim Crow would have never went away.
No, those of you who are listening, and you two here, you can find on the internet very easily, find out how it is for kids nowadays.
Yeah.
There is a video of a woman, it's going viral, and a young woman, she's in college, and she's teaching ballet. She speaks of Christ, and she's very outwardly about her faith, but what she does is she teaches ballet, and she's got 5-year-olds. These are 5-year-old girls. How old are your kids? I know
11, 7, and 2.
Okay, so your 7-year-old's close to this age. These 5-year-old girls are asking this ballet teacher, can we play music so they could twerk to? Because that's what the kids want to do.
Yeah.
And when the teacher is telling them, because ballet's strict, right?
Right.
Fun fact, I danced. I knew a lot of ballerinas, and it's strict.
Yeah.
And when the teacher says, stop talking, you're supposed to stop talking.
Yeah.
These little girls are telling their teacher, hey, shut up. I don't want to do that.
Right.
And the teacher's asking, parents, where are you? What are you doing? And a lot of them, and again, not everyone, but a lot of people are starting to notice a lot of millennial parents are just kind of letting their kids do whatever they want. And it's like my mom always said, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And you got a 5-year-old girl. I mean, Michael, if one of your daughter's teachers came up to you and was like, hey, your daughter wanted to do this, and I told him no, and she told me to shut up.
Oh, yeah. Somebody's going to be in a lot of trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
There's consequences.
Don't tell authority
And
figures.
the first thing that I would do is all the electronics are mine.
Yeah.
No tablets, no TV, no nothing.
Right.
Because a lot of the stuff that kids are picking up is not only from the adults they're around, but from social media and all the other things that they're consuming that they're not mature enough to really comprehend.
Right.
No.
And so absolutely, one of the first places I go is, okay, we're cutting all that off, because no matter how hard you try, no matter what kind of locks or parental controls you put on things, children are resourceful, and they'll figure out a way.
Yeah.
And you have to be careful what they're being allowed exposure,
Right.
or what they're exposing themselves to, because they don't quite grasp it.
Something I've noticed is that when I was a teacher, I noticed which students had a relationship with at least one of their parents to the point where and it usually stood out with how they respected authority, how they spoke, for one, because I don't know about you guys, but when I was in high school, I wasn't using the same terminology that I used with my friends with any adult. I never said certain words. I never said to my football coach, oh, man, that's sick. Hey, dude, how's it going? It was always sir, ma'am, no, sir, yes, sir, all that type of stuff. And you can always tell when they have a decent relationship with their parents, because they'll even talk about their parents in a positive way. Like, oh, I was talking with my dad last night about the news, and we were just discussing this. And those types of things, I would say, Luke's going to be here soon for me. And I told Sarah, I said, I don't think it's going to be impossible, but it's going to be difficult. But I don't want him to have an iPad or an iPhone or any such thing. And I get it. And I know parents will probably look at me and be like, good luck. And I get that. First of all, eat dirt. I'm not going to listen to you guys and discouraging me. But me and my wife are going to make sure our son is brought up in a way where he can walk up to Michael and say, how's it going, Mr. Murphy? How's your day going? Instead of like, yo, Michael, what's up? Because I don't want my son doing that. I don't need my son falling for what the world is trying to push to many kids, and I know it's not going to be easy, but I think a lot of parents would do well if you just sat down for about 30 minutes, 40 minutes with your older children and just kind of, hey, what's going on? And I know that's not easy. I know that's not possible for everybody, but still, it's just one of those things where we have this house divided thing that we're talking about. We're talking about the enemy pushing things and trying to keep themselves together. Well, a good portion of that is going straight to your kids through the TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, X. And so just, that's just my 2 cents on that part. But
something you said very early on, and I agree with what you said. And one of the things that you said, Michael, very early on was you was talking about how that they're Baptist, they're Methodist, they're Pentecostal, they're Church of Christ, they're this, that, whatever. And one of the things that the church does is we're known for what we're against, but we're not known for what we're for. And if we go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, now this is what Paul writes here, and he says, now concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered together to him, we ask you, brothers, not to be quickly shaken in mind or alarmed, either by a spirit or a spoken word or a letter seeming to be from us. So what's going on here? He's already addressing that there are people that are writing letters, and you quoted that out of Romans a little bit earlier. What's going on is there's people, these that are writing this stuff in order to deliberately try to bring a division amongst the church, even in the very early days. And so that's been something that has been one of Satan's techniques from day one. Why? Because Satan knows, and this is what Jesus was saying, he knows that you can't be divided and win. And he knows that ultimately he's defeated. That's why Revelation says that he's come down with great wrath. And for all of you, Iron Maiden fans out there, as in their song "Number of the Beast," it's what was the guy's name that was on the Michael Jackson video? I shouldn't be forgetting his name. He was an actor.
Which one? Chris Tucker?
No. He was in Thriller. He was the voice in Thriller.
Oh, I don't know.
What was his name?
I'm too young.
I shouldn't be forgetting. No. I shouldn't be forgetting his name. But he reads that verse out of Revelation, where it says that woe to you, earth, and the inhabitants of the earth, for the devil has come down with great wrath, knowing that his time is short. See, the difference is that Satan knows well enough to know that his time is short, so he works very efficiently. We as Christians have this idea that what we're doing is we're waiting for Jesus to come back. And so it's like we want to just shut ourselves off. And let the world, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. But the church, and this is what Paul's talking about here, he says, even if the letter seems to be from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. And what they were trying to tell them is that Jesus had already come and that these guys were living in the middle of the tribulation. And so Paul is answering that question. But then he goes on and he says, he says in, let me find that because it was right here. He says in verse 7, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains it will do so until he is out of the way. And so who is the one, because this whole chapter is talking about lawlessness, is what it's talking about. And in verse 8 he says, and after verse 7, the only he who restrains it will do so until he is out of the way. Now, who he's talking about there is the church. And in verse 8 he says, and then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the breath of his mouth and bring to nothing by the appearance of his coming. And so what's happening is as the church is beginning to constrict back, we're seeing, as James says, there's many antichrists. We're seeing the spirit of the Antichrist, which is the lawless one. And it's enlarging itself. And this is why, what's happening here is you're talking about these kids that are in this ballerina class. Not only is that complete disrespect for authority, and sometimes I understand you've got to take a stand against authoritative, but not only is that disrespect for authority, but it's also teaching them how not to even respect the situation you're in. I mean, how many people will come up and completely, you can see they have no idea what situation they're in. They have no idea what room they're in. They have no idea how to talk to people because they've been taught since kids, you do what you want to do. And in that situation, tell them to shut up.
It's an effective lack of discipline.
Yes.
And the Bible's very clear on discipline with your children.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of scriptures pulled up here. Proverbs 23:13. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. Okay. Yeah. I know everybody's against corporal punishment nowadays, but sometimes I truly believe that it's necessary to spank them, especially to get their attention on something that's extremely drastic or dangerous. Sometimes just the sheer don't do that doesn't leave a mark enough. But, I've also got Proverbs 13:24. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him.
Yeah, you can't gentle parent. It's not real. Parenting is not a gentle thing.
The world is not soft.
No.
The world is harsh, and a lot of people grow up sheltered and then are shocked when the world doesn't cater to their wants.
Well, God forbid if we're headed towards World War III, they're going to find that out the hard way.
You mentioned,
Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, yeah.
Were you finished?
Oh, yeah. That's.
I mean, if you weren't, go ahead.
Oh, no. I think it's a harsh reality.
Yeah.
Because so many people. Well, and now, like we go back to the tablets, they're being raised by electronics. The parents are not teaching their children. They're not disciplining the children, and so they're left to their own devices.
Right.
Well, that's what children are going to do.
Yeah.
It's going to be Lord of the Flies. You're going to have kids going crazy.
Yeah. Well, kind of going back to what I was talking about with the French Revolution, that's where your guys like Nietzsche and that's where that's Nietzsche's who really influenced Karl Marx. And Marx is the guy who gives us communism. And it came out of the French Revolution. Why? Because it was a godless revolution. And, I'm not saying that because I'm just being a flag waver here, but you can read what happened in the French Revolution, and it was just blood is all it was. And it did not end well. But the thing is, it had a rippling effect that is affecting us now. Because, I think some people within the West, and especially within America, after the Iron Curtain fell, we just kind of thought, oh, Marx is in his grave, we're good. But we aren't, because what happened is especially
who's running Russia now?
That's right.
A former KGB agent who lived through the glory days of the Soviet Union
and trying to bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, and he's made no qualms. He's not hidden his agenda. I mean, he's made it clear that that's one of the things he wishes to do, is to bring back the USSR.
Yeah, and he's very careful on how he says it, but that is what he's wanting to do. And one of Paul is not. See, this is why I'm saying that we as the church cannot be afraid to mention Satan or his kingdom. We don't glorify it. We don't fear it, but we respect it. And there's a difference, because the Bible says that Michael the archangel, when arguing over or disputing Satan over the body of Moses, dared not make a railing accusation, but he simply said, Satan, the Lord rebuke you. And Paul, being one who's not afraid to mention it, he goes on in verse 9 and he says, the coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan, with all power and false signs and wonders. Watch this in verse 10. And with all wicked deception for those who are perishing, because they refused to love the truth and be saved. Therefore God sends them a strong delusion so that they may believe what is false. Because, and I love what he says there in verse 10, he says they refused to love the truth and be saved. I mean, the truth is out there. I mean, to quote the X-Files, the truth is out there, but we have to stay within the Scripture. I loved what one man, R.C. Ryle, who was a theologian and just a great theologian at that, and he had this to say. He says, "What is the best safeguard against false doctrine? The Bible regularly read, regularly prayed over, and regularly studied." J.C. Ryle said that. And that is the key thing right there. And that is what so many churches, there's a lot of ministers out there who are doing great at being motivational speakers, but they're not doing so well at teaching the truth.
No.
Yeah, because they're I'm not going to say all of them, but a large portion of them are there for the wrong reason, and that's to make money.
Mm-hmm.
You don't make money by making everybody
Right.
the doom and gloom. It's all happy-go-lucky, cheery. They don't mention the consequences
Yes.
of living in sin.
Mm-hmm.
we like to talk about how we live under grace. We do. But grace also comes with repentance. And repentance doesn't mean you just apologize for what you've done, but you turn from it.
Yep.
You don't continue to live in sin. And people sometimes have a hard time giving those things up. So they want somebody that, it's okay. And they kind of allow them to stay straddling the fence, so to speak. And that's one of the things that you absolutely can't do, because you're welcoming darkness in where it should only be light.
That's right. And in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, Paul's given a sign of the rapture, or he's talking about the rapture. And in verse 18, if you read that whole chapter, and I would encourage you, if you're listening to this podcast, get your Bible, read 1 Corinthians chapter 4. And for time, I'm not going to take the time to read that. But he's talking about the rapture. That's really what it's talking about. And then it's talking about the Great Tribulation. But you mentioned doom and gloom. In verse 18, he says, therefore, encourage one another with these words. The impending coming of the Lord is not something to be discouraged about. In 1 Timothy or 2 Timothy, he says that in the latter times, in the last days, perilous times will come. That is not something to be discouraged about. That is, for me, going back to what he says in the book of Revelation, when he says that Satan has come down with great wrath, for he knows that his time is short. That to me says to us as Christians, we need to move, and you know this from a military statement, move with purpose. We should be moving. Every step should count. It may not. The Bible tells us that says that Satan moves about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. We have the Holy Spirit to guide us, and we should be praying every day. What is the next step? What divine appointments do you have for me today, God? And then allow him to open those doors and take us in that direction.
I have to say the walking like that has been tough for me.
I think it is for all of us, really.
Right, and I say being the youngest, not trying to brag or anything. I'm just stating fact, guys. Don't kill me or anything. No, being the youngest, when the internet showed up, I know you guys were there. I was there too, but I actually was one of the first generations to be.
Before I forget it, Vincent Price.
From Michael J. Okay. But pull that up, Michael. But when I was in school, I don't know if you had it, and I don't know if you had it, but when I was in first grade, they took us to the computer lab, and I'm sure you guys know what that is.
Yeah,
but
my age was the first ones that had the Mac in school.
Okay, cool. So when we got in there, now the internet wasn't that big, though, right?
The internet was primarily. There were people using it,
right?
But it was not open to the public,
right? So I grew up on like cool math games and things where we
were playing Cimarron Trail.
Yeah, the Oregon Trail.
Oregon Trail. In fact, that's what my generation is actually referred to. I think we're referred to as the Oregon Trail generation,
right?
Because we actually are so young that we're not truly.
You're not technologically literate.
We're not Gen Xers,
right?
But we don't actually catch within the millennials. We're kind of in between that.
Yeah, like it depends on how you act, really, where you end up. But what I'm getting at is that it's been really hard because for the longest time, let's get real quick. You guys probably grew up where people had porn in magazines. Now, I know that was a thing when I was growing up, but by the time the iPhone came out and some of my friends had the iPhone, porn was in our back pocket.
Yeah.
And so I would say something that really gets to a lot of people my age is I start to realize is that the reason, because you mentioned some people don't know how to talk to other people, is that we wear our shame very, very close to our heart, but then again also on our shoulder, and so we don't want to talk to anybody, and it's hard. It gets extremely hard to walk in faith with a purpose,
right? Because
I don't want to be ashamed when I come to Thomas about my problem or Michael about my problem, because it's as easy as turning off your phone and leaving it in the other room at night. It's as easy as it's as simple as that, but it ain't easy, and it's tough because when you're conditioned. Now, I'm not making an excuse for anybody to continue to go back to your sin like a dog going back to vomit, but I am saying that I can empathize with men my age and younger who are struggling with that, because it's not like you guys don't struggle with that. It's just I can see how it's pretty hard for young men, especially in America.
You mentioned that point. One of the things I remember, probably it would have been your generation when you guys were like 3rd, 4th grade, JaVaughn, probably about that time.
2003, 2004.
Yeah, they handed several kids a magazine, and they took the magazine and they were trying to expand the picture on the magazine.
That's a little after mine.
Was that after?
Yeah, it's a little after me because I was actually still writing current events from newspaper clippings for for classes. So I knew, but I know what you're talking about. That's actually Travian, my younger brother, who was on with me and Michael.
About that generation.
That's his. Yeah, that's his age.
And you mentioning about your generation having a struggle. Really, to be honest, right after the invention. Well, I shouldn't say the invention, but when you still had dial up, had all those noises. From you got mail. One of the major Pentecostal organizations. No, it was Pew Research. I only know this because I know one of the major Pentecostal organizations reported this. Mm-hmm. But Pew Research talked about how that porn addiction had jumped drastically amongst the clergy, because these were a lot of ministers who would never have went to a
video store with the back room.
Yeah, with the back room, seedy back room that that you'd have to go in and do the walk of shame because there was the camera there and everybody could see it.
Yep.
And so they weren't going to go and buy a porn mag.
Yeah, and they're not going to a sex shop.
The worst thing that many of them would have is they would have the you remember the old you probably remember this, Michael, the old satellite dishes that would sit out in the backyard, and it looked like you were trying to, you worked for NASA and you were trying to find out if they were aliens.
Skinemax.
Yeah. So these things were huge, right? So you could literally watch them adjust, and awesome. You almost knew what your neighbor was looking at because the whole thing would just go straight up and down, right? I mean, the satellite would be going straight up into the sky, and so the point being is that as the internet came about, people had fun fact here. The 3 little, what are those called? CIV letters on the back of a credit card?
Oh, yeah.
You know how those got started? No. So there were 3 programmers that put that together, and they couldn't sell it. Nobody wanted it. No one wanted it. They went to like all your main merchandisers.
Yeah.
This was after the internet. Told them what they could do. Hey, because a lot of your merchandisers back then, like your big companies like Dillard's and them, even though they're forward thinkers, they weren't forward enough to realize people are going to buy stuff off of our online store. Mm-hmm. But there was one industry that took it.
The porn
industry. And so like with everything, every year companies get to see what the revenue is in every industry. And so what they looked at is they saw where the porn industry went from making millions of dollars to overnight, boom, billions of dollars. And when they began to inquire, why is that? It was because they were like, no one's going to put their credit card online.
Yeah.
Well, these guys were, and thousands of them.
Yep.
And so they could just hit the button.
It's gone. It's right there.
And so now, anything you do, you've got to put those 3 little numbers in, because then that way it allows them to directly deduct it or directly deposit, whatever, so on and so forth. And so what Pew Research realized was, and what they reported was that porn had become a much bigger issue with not just in the church, but also within the clergy once the invention of the internet.
Yeah, because you think it's private. You really do. But I want to say I was in like middle school or high school when the Ashley Madison thing happened, and all those names
was 2015, 16,
something like that. Yeah, but it was leaked, and everybody and their mother was on it. Of course, like I'm being hyperbolic again. But there's so many people on there who assumed, it'll never be leaked, but your information is on there.
Use their MIL, like their
military
and their government emails and all that. Like
it was just stupid.
Yeah.
And people trust that stuff. But let me back up. That goes again, staying on topic with the division. What we as Christians have to be careful of. We can go all the way back to when TV was first started, and the church fought against television. They back then, people had to put antennas on the top of their house,
right?
And a lot of preachers would call them devil's tails. They were against television. Well, they lost that market, and so from that point on, it has been a thing where I heard Stephen Baldwin, the brother of Alec Baldwin. He claims to be a Christian. He said something one time. I thought, man, that's true. He quoted the scripture where it says that Satan is the god of the air
and airwaves.
And that's what he said. And he has learned how to. He knows he's got the people in place to control it. And so there's this constant bombardment. We know that things are going to get rough, but the problem is the church is going to have to figure out a way to come together. We're going to have to figure out a way to have a united front, because if we don't, it's not just us. It's your future son coming into the world. It's your children. It's the people listening here that have kids and grandkids. They're coming for them, and they have the means to do it because they're united in doing it.
Right. I might say something controversial here, but I don't think, and it's going to sound wild, I don't think that the church needs the internet. I think we can do well on our own here. I think what churches need to do.
I think it's something we can use. I don't think we need it, but we can use it.
I think, and I'm just thinking out loud, thought experiment. I think it's the Pandora's box to the church, because one of the things that's very easy is for people to latch on to worldly people and say, oh, I trust him wholeheartedly no matter what he does, even though they have scandals come out. But as soon as something happens at a small church in middle America, it's like, oh, see, the whole church is a problem.
Right.
And I think, and for me personally,
it's the same thing they did when all those priests were caught abusing kids.
Right.
At that point, it was the whole church, and
But my point is that I agree. A united front is great, but we aren't soldiers. We're not. We fight spiritually, and we can do that in our own areas.
Yeah.
Do it in your own backyard.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that if you meet a Christian from Timbuktu or from Gaza or from Germany that you should be like, all right, well, you're from those places.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. No. We should be, hey, open arms, love you.
Yeah.
This is us here. But I can't for the life of me sit here and co-sign an idea of the church needs to be united 100% all across the board, because I'm not worried about kids in Little Rock right now. I'm worried about the kids in my backyard here in Conway. And I say this, we should all be together in prayer, but I don't think people need to worry about what's happening in someone else's backyard when you could easily take care of yours here, or the missions that your church is supporting.
Well,
okay, well, so go ahead.
I was going to say, so I view, my view has changed somewhat as I've gotten older, but I look at this building, because we're recording in the church right now.
Thank you, Convergent City.
It's a war room.
Yeah.
We're fighting a spiritual war.
Absolutely.
We're not fighting a physical war.
Right.
But I think it's the church itself has fallen victim to the whole divide and conquer.
Yeah.
Divide and conquer, if you go back in history, okay, well, you can go back to the Old Testament. The Babylonians divided the Jewish tribes up, and that's ultimately led to their defeat. The Assyrians, I mean, you can go back. The Greeks and Romans really capitalized on it.
Yeah.
I think, which is why Jesus spoke a lot of, a house divided can't stand.
Right.
Because that was their tactic.
Yeah.
They literally coined the phrase for divide and conquer.
Yeah.
It was divide and rule.
Yeah.
The Greeks first coined the term, and then the Romans just ran with it.
Yeah.
And they got good at it up until the point where they grew so large they divided themselves. Yeah. But I think that part of the problem is we've allowed that to creep in, and unfortunately, or unfortunately, I guess, what the Bible says has to come to fruition. The reason I say is that's the fortunate part. The unfortunate part is we've allowed things that God himself is against to become rooted in church, and that's caused a lot of division.
Right.
There was a large portion of I want to say it was the United Methodist Church just broke off in Georgia.
They did. Well, the one in Searcy, Arkansas broke off. Yeah. There was a split there over that.
And what we don't realize, I think, as a whole, looking at the church, is we're falling to the same tactic that Satan's been using, since humanity has existed,
since the garden.
Well, I think in that situation, that's probably a good division, because they're, the Bible tells us to come out from among them and be separate. I think in that situation, that's probably not a good division. But to give you an example, the whole separation of church and state, that's probably the best one I can think of when it comes to divide and conquer, because that phrase is not even in the Constitution. That was a phrase that Thomas Jefferson wrote in a letter to the Danbury Baptist, and he is talking about they're inquiring, and at the time Jefferson wasn't even in government. He was not even at the Constitutional Convention. They were concerned about, is the government going to tell us basically how to worship? And Jefferson was putting their fears at ease, and he was just trying to say, look, we don't have a state-ran church. We have a church that is free from the state. And because we don't have, to put it best, that is American exceptionalism. We don't have a king who rules by divine right. We are a people that believe our rights come from God. And we believe, so therefore we believe worship how you see fit. And so they were concerned about that, and they love to say separation of church and state, but you can go into many schools and they have these 5 segments. I think we talked about this last week. They have these segments of doing yoga in the classroom. Okay, you want to do yoga to exercise? I don't care. Okay, I'm going to say that, and that's going to be controversial. But at the end of the day, it's still attached to a religion. You can, during Halloween, you're going to find witches and all that stuff. That's still a religion.
See,
but if you try to put the 10 Commandments up, you're going to face it, and the ACLU is going to come against you, and you're going to be sued. Separation of church and state. It's not in the Constitution.
Let's just be real. It's separation of Christian and state.
Yeah.
Well, so once again, the reason that they were so big on that the separation of the church and the state was to protect the church from the government.
That's right.
It's just like our Constitution is not to – it's to limit the power of the federal government. It's to give you more power than your government.
Right.
The church was supposed to have more power than the government. The thing is, they've turned it and they've twisted it and used it to squeeze the church and to put pressure on them.
That's exactly what they've done, and they've been very successful at it. Why? Because they have a united front, and we don't. And when I say united front, I understand what you mean, JaVaughn. I know what you're saying, that I'm not as concerned about what's going on in the next town over. But when it comes to dealing with, which, the government of Arkansas, the state government is, Sarah Huckabee Sanders is the governor, and our government is relatively, hands off. But you can go into some states. Let's go back to COVID. How long did it take some states like Washington State and New York and California to relent and go, okay, go back to life as normal? I mean, they still don't want to do that.
Well, but they were allowing certain activities, such as riots,
to
take place where everybody's shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
But heaven forbid you go to church.
Well, they were about ready. They tried to sue. They really would have loved to have arrested John MacArthur, because he was having church during that whole time.
The Calvary Chapel of San Jose, the pastor's a family friend of mine. He was all over the news too because he didn't close down. And they were giving him fine after fine after fine after fine, and they would have loved to take him down. But the fact of the matter is that his First Amendment right would have not held up.
Well, it was Justice Roberts, I believe, who told him. He said, "Look," he said, "This is really." he said this is tiptoeing into government totalitarianism and tyrannical dictatorship.
Right.
Because they want to quote separation of church and state as long as it keeps the Christians out of the public square, but they are more than happy to try to bleed over into the state, into the church. And that's what I mean when I say we have to have a united front. We have to get with churches that are like-minded in believing that Jesus, the Son of God, that Jesus died, was buried, resurrected, rose again, ascended back to the Father. Believe in the essentials of salvation, believe in the essentials of Christianity, the cardinal doctrines, as we call them. We have to find them, and we have to have a united front because, look, if the church ever wanted to, we could shut this country down. We could. But the problem is, we have too many people that are afraid. We allow ourselves to be bullied. And the first thing they want to jump to is separation of church and state. And you're going, guys, it's not in the Constitution. Quit fearing it. Quit worrying about it. They can't do anything. Not really. It's just smoke and mirrors.
Because the bullying tactics worked.
Yeah.
Why? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is the same thing. They've pushed it, and inevitably the church typically will bow, and so it just keeps marching forward. But the more, at a certain point, you have to make a stand, and when you're unwilling to do so, then you get toppled.
Right.
Like you will get pushed down to the point where you're obscure or obsolete.
Right.
And it's one thing we've got to fight against.
You'll see it on the internet more times than not where people stand up and they get punched. But I'm going to tell you something that's very strange. 9 times out of 10, when you stand up to somebody who's barking like a dog, and just like a dog, when you stand up, tail goes between their legs and they walk away. Because for the most part, I have a puppy. It's half German Shepherd, half Pit Bull. Pretty aggressive dogs.
Yeah.
He's nipping and biting. I simply put my foot down from my couch, and he's already backing up because he knows I'm in charge of the house.
Right.
Somebody comes to my house, somebody comes to Michael's house, somebody comes to your house, you put your foot down, and you stand up to them. Look at how many times when somebody, with a gun tries to break into a house, but then they realize the person in the house has a gun. What do? They run because they're bullies. They want to take the easy way to get what they want and then to run. But I mean, that is what Satan does best, is that he has a united front of bullying. He has a united front of scaring you into thinking that look at how many people I've got ready to go.
Yeah.
When you forget that you serve a God who has defied the odds in battle time and time again. And if you want a very recent one, it was our independence from the empire of the world.
Right.
And so when you have these people who sit here and say, well, I don't really want to do anything because I'm afraid my kids are going to get hurt. I'm not telling you to get them hurt. I'm not telling you to put yourself in danger. But when somebody tells you you shouldn't do something, and you in your heart of hearts know that you should stand up for something, and you don't, you're allowing the evil man to win, and you're not doing anything, and it's not good. Right. So we, as believers, and thank you, Thomas, for clarifying, but I agree. A united front of prayer and devotion and communication is good.
Yeah.
Now, take that and then stand up for your local areas. When you're at church, like here at Convergent City Church in Conway, we open our doors up on Sundays whenever we're having dinner. Yeah. And 10 out of 10 times, anybody who shows up at our door is going to get fed. Anytime somebody shows up to service, they're going to be prayed for. Yeah. Anytime somebody says, my water heater broke, or I need some help underneath my house.
My wife's going to have knee surgery and I need a deck built. I mean, we went out in the very cold
weather.
It was
very cold. It was literally a year ago, like last week. Yeah. Because it was around my birthday. I remember that. So it's one of those things where you need to, as a church, communicate with other churches. See what they're doing. You might pick up some cool tips and tricks and stuff. But you focus on your backyard because just like the Israelites in the Old Testament, when they were building the wall, guess where their house had to go? Right there. So right now we are spiritually in a battle where we're building our own walls against the evils of the world. And guess what? It should be where your house is, because you're going to take up a sword much faster when that wall starts getting attacked.
Well, Jesus said, the strong man armed keeps his house. And one of the reasons I started this podcast was because a lot of people on our side, we don't have a lot of activists on our side. And when I say activist, I'm not meaning people that are, just, going out and doing what's the name of whatever that Baptist group is that protested all the military funerals. I can't remember their name. I can never remember their name. But
I want to say it's Hillsboro, but I don't know if that's correct.
I think you might be right. Hillsboro Baptist or something like that. Point being is, that I'm not talking about those kind of activists. I'm talking about people that are willing to go get on something like YouTube and say, look, YouTube is doing this thing where they're demonetizing and they're taking people off. And I figure once the podcast really starts to grow, we might start getting a little bit more pushback. But at the end of the day,
not to cut it was Westboro.
Westboro Baptist.
I knew it had a borough in it.
Yeah, I'm not talking about those kind of crazy people. I'm not talking about being an activist like that. I'm talking about you may have to show up to your city council meetings.
Yeah.
You may have to show up to your school board meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, it might make it a little uncomfortable for your family. But that is more preferable than watching your kids go to the meat grinder in something that is meant to destroy the very foundation and fabric that you have tried to put into your kids.
Yep. I think what we do here is important, but what's most important, parents especially, is for you to sit down and create your own community in your own home.
Well, that's where it all starts.
It's all where it starts. We can have exchanges here all the time, and this has been a great exchange tonight. I think it's been great. Thomas texted us before the podcast that I think it's going to be great tonight.
It has been.
And it has been. And we're truly blessed to those who have subscribed, and we can continue to ask you subscribe and comment. And it starts, it's a nice extension here, but it really does start at home. Thomas has a family that he gets to go home to and talk to and have conversations with, and there's kids in that house.
Yeah.
And they get to hear these things.
Right.
One of the most encouraging things was to hear that our pastor's son was at a movie theater and led the charge with his friends to leave said movie. I don't remember what it was, some war movie or something like that. But either way, it was one of those things where he stood up
had something to do
against
with
the world.
soccer. It was based on a true story.
Interesting. But he stood up and he said, I don't think we should be here because there were curse words. Now, it started at home.
Yeah.
And for Michael, I know his daughters are being taught right because one of them I saw standing up to another kid who was making fun of a third kid.
Train up a child, right?
Training up a child to say, hey, cut that out. That's, that's foolish. That's dumb. And and I don't see that in the public schools. I saw it here at church because they're being raised with a foundation and surrounded by other people like-minded. And that's why we always, always, always encourage you to go to a church.
Yeah.
Get a community where you can have these exchanges because it's not just happening here.
Day one.
Yeah, every single time. So I would say, listen, hey, keep praying for me and my wife. We got very little sleep coming up in the near future. That's for sure. But I think that was great.
I do too. And I'll just say, hey, go with God and JaVaughn, until you get back, man, we're gonna miss you being on here week after week. And but like you said, you'll still be around and he'll still be contributing to some effect, I'm sure. But Michael, you got any closing statements?
Well, so I was going to close this out with Proverbs 22:6, which says, train up a child in the way that he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. It's so important. The foundation of your children start at home, and they will go out and they will spread it to the world. Mm-hmm. But if you don't raise them right, you're doing them a disservice, and you're doing your community, your state, the nation, the world as a whole, you're doing it a disservice.
Amen.
You're right.
You
I
owe
think
it to your children.
I think a lot of parents don't really know what their kids are being taught at school.
No, they don't.
They're not involved.
And it's as simple as every day when I pick my children up from school, I go, what did you learn today?
Yeah.
What did y'all talk about?
Yep.
Yeah.
Not only does it reinforce like, oh, we learned multiplication.
Yeah.
Great. Show me.
Yeah.
So that we can, one, they're excited that they learned something. Two, I can see what they're learning.
Yeah.
And we can build that relationship together. What was your favorite thing about today?
Yeah.
Well, did anything upset you? Those kinds of simple conversations where you get involved in your child's life. One, you learn a great deal about them, and they feel like you genuinely care. Like you should love your children unconditionally, but it fosters a better relationship.
Right. And if they find out that, if they come in that day and they said, hey, we found out that Davy can become, Daisy and have a kid, it's a whole lot easier to correct that right on the spot.
First of all, don't name your kid Davy. Come on.
Well, I'll close this out.
Go ahead.
With an example. Adelaide came home, who's my oldest daughter, and she said, and I said, what did you learn today? And she said, we learned that the police killed Martin Luther King Jr. I said, the police absolutely did not kill Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh, shucks. That's a great conversation right there.
Yeah. Well, and I'm like, you do, and she was talking about how the police brutality and this and that. And I said, you do understand that that's what Daddy does. Like, and I said, I've never done that to anyone.
Yeah.
Yes, there are bad people in every profession.
Right.
But I said, where did you learn that? Because I was a little hot.
Yeah, I get that.
And I told her, I said, that's absolutely not what occurred. Let me tell you about it. It opened the door for us to have a conversation about history and the events that led up to it and how people were mistreated.
Yeah.
Yep.
But an outright lie.
Yeah.
And you got to think that a lot of that ran with the whole Antifa, police are corrupt, police are evil, which is overwhelmingly not the case.
Yeah.
And I know I've harped about it on here before, but by and large, police are just people trying to do their best.
Yeah.
And, we've been over the statistics before, but you're more likely to be killed by your doctor than you are a cop.
True.
I mean, that's the simple reality of
Right.
it. But, I got to learn firsthand some of the false narratives that are trying to get. And you got to think, this is a couple of years ago, and she's 11 now. What are they trying to force on the kids? Are super impressionable, especially around the 5-year-old mark.
Yep.
You really have to be careful what they're being taught because they'll hold on to it.
Mm-hmm.
And most of her classmates, that has already been galvanized into their mind at this point.
Right.
Because they didn't have the luxury that your daughter did to go, for a parent to go, no, let's correct that.
Right.
Let's go look. I was actually impressed by a teacher this last week who took the time to teach her class the true story of Thanksgiving. And I was just really impressed because we're told that by with 1611 all this stuff that it was the evil people that came over, white people that came over. And there was, they forced the natives to do this, that, and the other. And it's like, no. Squanto, Colonel, what was his name? I shouldn't be forget. I forget names, and I hate that. But he said that it was God's providence that they met Squanto because of the fact that Squanto had been kidnapped by British fleet and taken back to England and was taught. Now, look, what are the chances of this? He was taught English.
Yeah.
Okay. And he comes back and he is able John Smith, I believe is who it was.
To bridge the gap.
He's able to bridge the gap. He's able to actually go and take them to the tribes. Some of these tribes may have killed him.
Yeah.
Right. But they didn't because he was able to translate and say, hey, these guys aren't our enemies. And so they came and they taught the Pilgrims how to hunt, how to fish, and how to do all, skin a deer and how to do all this stuff. And that, that is the stuff that is not taught. Rather, it's taught stuff like that, where the police killed Martin Luther. No, it was a white supremacist who killed him, just like it was with Abraham Lincoln. It was an actor who was, he was a sympathizer to the Confederacy. That's what killed him, not some narrative.
Boy, let's have that conversation someday. But hey, it's around the corner, Thanksgiving, and you can have that conspiracy conversation with your good uncle at Thanksgiving at the big boys table. But my name's JaVaughn Iversen. It's been wonderful being with you guys. I will be here in and out. Tom Paul Tipton, you are a wonderful host, and I can't wait to see what happens in the future for you and Michael here, and I look forward to being in the background for all of you guys, but I love you guys. I will give my wife a hug and a kiss, and I will also give my son a good hug from the Exchange Podcast. Everybody, be safe out there. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and we're out.